Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Economic Development Innovation Committee. We have one item on our agenda today. It is TC 123 Stormwater Management Regulations, and I will turn over to Mr. Raleigh.
All right. Good afternoon, Chairman Melton and members of the committee. So at the last committee meeting back in June, you requested some follow-up on the conversation. Specifically, you asked to hear from the development community just to get some insight and feedback on the provisions around TC 123. And so in response to that, we have an esteemed member of the development community who's worked specifically in the stormwater space for a number of years with us to provide some feedback, not just on TC 123, but also kind of some more general comments around our stormwater management practices and some wonderful insight. I've provided you Natalie Carmen's bio at your place, but I do want to just kind of pick out a couple of highlights so that you understand how fortunate we are to have her with us to speak to this issue today. So Natalie received her Bachelor's of Landscape and Landscape Architecture from NC State, as well as a master's degree in engineering. She has spent a number of years working for Stewart, the local firm, and she's worked on more than 100 projects in North Carolina, which includes projects on both the public and the private side. Some of the projects that you're probably familiar with include Rust Bus, the Raleigh Ironworks project, Seaboard Station, and many, many, many others. Natalie also was awarded the Young Engineer of the Year award in North Carolina just recently. She has just made a recent career change. She stepped away from her position as Director of Civil Engineering at Stewart to more fully devote her time and resources to the development of affordable housing in the Triangle. But again, lots of insight and familiarity with the stormwater management process, specifically ours. And so without further ado, I will ask Natalie to come and provide you with some of her thoughts and insights.
Thank you, Mr. Raleigh, and thank you, council members and committee members, for the opportunity to speak here today. I'm a longtime Raleigh resident and care deeply about the issues that are being discussed, and want to first just thank you for providing the space for this conversation. As a citizen of Raleigh, I think it's really important, and I'm glad that we're working on solutions. I was not present at the last meeting, but I did watch it, so I understand the breadth of information that was discussed and presented. I think Ben Brown did an excellent job of providing some overview on just stormwater goals and history locally. I think that we're all on the same page, but it's worth stating that stormwater goals and affordable housing are really hand in hand, supporting each other in the larger context. If stormwater objectives are not achieved, then ultimately it's downstream communities that are in floodplains, historically underprivileged communities that are impacted. And so we want to make sure that we're sticking with stormwater goals while also thinking forward about how to be more proactive in providing affordability for all citizens locally, but also keeping in mind downstream communities outside of our city. I also wanted to talk about some of the cost of compliance that seemed to be kind of something that wanted more discussion in the last meeting. And I think it's important to state that the cost of compliance has always been present, but it hasn't always been equitably distributed. And so prior to stormwater regulations, downstream communities were flooded. I personally remember cleaning up after Fran and Floyd down in Tarboro. And since that time, in the late 90s, since stormwater regulations have been instated, they evolve over time. And while stormwater regulations are complicated and a little bit of a moving target, they are based on real-world data. Mr. Raleigh mentioned that I had my degree from NC State in engineering, and at that time I was part of a research team collecting data on stormwater, doing these real field research, and that data is what informs the state manual, which is informing a lot of the changes that you see in TC 123. So as we're looking about how to equitably distribute the cost of and installment and maintenance of stormwater, I also want to be thinking about future-proofing the city and being realistic about what types of storm events we can expect and the impact on both flooding and water quality locally and downstream. So one of the things I was asked to talk about today was just opportunities for improvement or pain points on the development side. So I have worked all over the state in several jurisdictions, and one of the benefits of TC 123 is just having some more homogeneity as far as stormwater regulations and expectations. And for example, City of Raleigh used to not allow for sand filters to count the same volume of stormwater as the state did. It was a more conservative estimate. And over the last couple of years, the City of Raleigh has worked to change that policy and ultimately save developers money. And it's a reasonable thing that doesn't sacrifice stormwater goals, but saves cost. Another thing that has historically been difficult over the last decade I've been practicing in Raleigh is just inconsistent review practices. So depending on who your reviewer was, there was a different expectation for how stormwater calculations would be presented. And that is something that the city has been working through. And I know specifically over the last 8 months, while I've not been submitting plans, it's been improved. But I think that's something that is really important to consider, not just for stormwater, but for all of the review disciplines. The importance of being able to pick up a phone, call a reviewer after your first review cycle and you have the reviewer assigned, and be able to talk through some of those comments to avoid unnecessary reviews. This is not specific to any one department. I think there's just some reviewers that are more willing to pick up the phone. Some of that comes with just being in the role longer and being more comfortable. But I think there's an opportunity for lessons learned across departments to benefit all developers, not just affordable housing. Another thing is when the code is clear about something not being allowed, for the city practice to be able to clearly articulate other options. So one kind of granular example is one of the new stormwater regulations is that all stormwater has to be treated. And that's a very high standard if you're thinking about 100% of the impervious on site to be treated. While the goal is important, thinking about alternatives and identifying that. So can we oversize to overtreat another part of the area, whether that be peak flow, water quality? Can there be some kind of payment into another plan? Just thinking creatively about what we can do when the code says no, what alternatives are available, and have that clearly stated for all developers. And then I think a big one that I'm excited about, it came out a couple years ago, is just more flexibility in where the stormwater control measures can be placed and allowing that to be within the sidewalk. I think that could be expanded into more of the street and provide what is commonly known as green streets to allow for a higher yield and usability of the land itself, and for things like residential units, and then have this street where the public be more multifunctional and accommodate more stormwater treatment. And there's a lot of precedent for that, but not in Raleigh. So globally, there's precedent for that. Nationally, there's precedent for that. But if the city were to kind of take ownership of providing those opportunities in specific projects and showing how it can be done successfully, then I would anticipate that that would be a popular choice for a lot of developers based on my experience. And just to be clear, that would be silva cells, permeable pavement, and, well, specifically silva cell bioretention, permeable pavement, bioretention bump outs, that really account for the importance of maintenance and landscape selection. Want to make sure that the city of Raleigh learns from other municipalities locally who have tried that and have some lessons learned, and so we don't repeat those mistakes, and really have everyone at the table. Getting back to just the review cycle and trying to think about how to practically remove pain points. I think there's a kind of a psychology of if you continue to if you just expect 5 or 7 review cycles, then I think everyone involved loses some momentum and motivation to do the best work, the best review possible. And so I want to be clear that it's not inevitable. I have gotten through stormwater review in the first cycle, that it's not a foregone conclusion. But when you get into a pattern of excessive review cycles, it can be detrimental to everyone involved. And so this, as a collective, having a goal of fewer review cycles, I think benefits everyone, everyone involved. Right. I did want to share a few kind of more outside the box ideas for improvement. One is, I think one of the big issues with stormwater is the maintenance, that long-term burden. So for a development, like for a particular housing development, one of the largest liabilities on a HOA is maintaining the stormwater control measure. Specifically, like if it were to have some overall failure and have to be rebuilt completely, that's a significant cost. One of the best ways to avoid that is to have proper inspection and maintenance practices. And given the wide range of experiences for HOAs, I think it would be beneficial for the city to explore an opportunity to share that maintenance burden, for owners to be able to opt in to some maintenance practices, so that ultimately the watershed benefits from that. Another, just kind of thinking big picture about how city land can be leveraged for affordable housing and stormwater. And for me, I see them very much compatible. Like if you have a denser row of units, the parking lot can easily be permeable pavement or have a sand filter underneath, just for the city to pave the way and showing the development community of what's possible. I do want to note that there are several local nonprofits who have been working in this field for 30 years and are doing an excellent job and are poised to be partners in that effort. And then lastly, as you all know, as the Economic Development Committee, there are economic incentive tools available to bring in desirable business, whether that be sports teams or companies, and I would love for the city to continue to apply that same creativity to affordable housing initiatives and how to economically incentivize that, specifically when it comes to stormwater cost. That's all I had prepared for today. I'm happy to answer any questions now or later.
Do you have any questions?
Oh, yeah.
All right, go ahead, Mayor.
So, a lot of what we're looking at really came from, compliance issues with the state. And just even with our, how do I say this? One of our projects that was done for affordable housing, the way states look at, say, cottage courts is different than how they look at duplexes or whatnot. So we're actually discouraging a form of affordable housing as opposed to encouraging, say, construction of something like cottage courts. And that's what was planned for this particular area. I think we have resolved that issue, but it took almost a year to get there. But some of these other rules that are coming down from the state tie our hands. So while we're talking about affordable housing, it's like we can only talk about certain kinds because the rules apply differently. And I think that a bill was vetoed that would have complicated this further, but I'm not 100% sure. So do you have a handle on, like, it's almost like it's contradictory.
So I am familiar with the law kind of differentiating between one and single and double unit lots versus triplex, quadplexes. It's out of my jurisdiction. It seems unreasonable to me that townhomes would be considered commercial when it's a residential use as far as building code and having some consistency there.
That's quads, too.
Yeah, I think I have a follow-up question for Pat on this, because the state law code just changed
Right.
to include 3 and 4 family dwelling units under the residential code. And I am curious how that will impact these regulations moving forward, because we had a little discussion about that.
Was that bill did they override that?
It was HB 488, and it was vetoed but overridden.
So that's law now.
Yes.
So 3 and 4 units are now in the residential code with 1 unit.
So good afternoon, Pat Young with Planning and Development. Thank you for your question, Committee Chair. My understanding, Jason Ruff of our building safety team is here and is more of our subject matter expert. My understanding is what the bill did is direct the Code Council to assess and evaluate and come back to them to change that to do exactly what you said, make 3 and 4 units residential structures to be reviewed under the single-family code by January 1st, 2025, I believe. And that's a huge, potentially transformational impact on affordability in my professional judgment. Other states that have that have seen that. One of the big challenges is the stormwater provisions that Natalie, and you'll hear about from, the stormwater provisions were not changed concurrently. So I think that in order to get the full benefit of that change, the stormwater rules will also have to be looked at and assessed.
Okay. So it impacts, from what I understand, some other building requirements that we're making, driving up the cost or the affordability of those units. For example, you used to have to install fire suppression system, which was extremely costly, but
That's
now
exactly
they've
right.
modified it to where it doesn't require any different sort of fire suppression than 1 unit.
That's exactly right. The Code Council is going to look at things like fire ingress and egress to make sure that it can be done safely. Some states handle that by having exterior stairs, for example. So it's unclear exactly how they'll do that, but you're exactly right. Currently, we see very few 3 and 4 unit residential structures because the cost of compliance, as you said, is very, very high, particularly fire suppression, basically sprinklering those buildings makes it cost prohibitive in the vast majority of cases.
But the stormwater requirements, to your knowledge, are not going to be changed.
They haven't been. My opinion is that we need to have some advocacy around that in order to align that with this change that was passed for the building code in order to get the maximum benefit, because I think the stormwater cost of compliance will become the check and the choke point on widespread deployment of those 3 and 4 unit structures.
You got your backup behind you.
Oh,
No, please. Ben Brown, Stormwater Management. Yes, after House Bill 488 was passed, Stormwater staff did reach out to NC Department of Environmental Quality staff, their stormwater section, to specifically ask if they've been brought in on those discussions. They have not, but I think some advocacy could help connect those dots, but I don't know how that would initially go right now. But as of now, they have not been, they weren't looking at House Bill 488 to change their policy on how they look at the triplexes and quadplexes.
And would advocacy mean our city lobbyists working on that issue?
I believe, and that and possibly other city staffers, other town and city staffers contact them about it as well.
And
Yeah.
also the Home Builders Association.
Yeah, because they haven't heard from anybody except for us about it until then. It was kind of their stance on it.
That's helpful, thank you. Anybody else have anything?
I'll just quickly add, if you don't mind, Councilmember Black. Jason Ruff, our Building Safety Assistant Director, is president of the North Carolina Building Inspectors Association. They certainly intend to have potentially a role there. So we'll give you all a additional brief on the different approaches we're going to take to advocate for that change. And certainly we want to do it in a way that considers environmental protection and water quality equally or more than it is today. Sorry to interrupt, Councilmember Black.
Councilmember Black.
So am I understanding that a lot of the concerns that we had around what we brought into the Economic Development Committee around the stormwater management regulations are kind of like a non-issue at the moment?
Yeah, I don't know. I think some of the concern was we adopted TC 123, and jump in if I'm incorrect, due to requirement in state law. And we just had some questions. I don't know if there were concerns, just some questions on how it would impact affordable housing development and just the cost of housing in general. Because anytime you put a new regulation on building, there's the risk that that regulation increases the cost, and then that cost is transferred down to the residents. But we've had a sort of a holistic discussion now, I think, about our stormwater regulations. There's a lot in the backup that's really helpful with regarding the incentives that we provide for folks where they can get reimbursed for some of their stormwater controlling devices or expedited review. But I do think this sort of shift on a state level, reclassifying some of these 3 and 4 units into just the residential code could be really helpful, because we don't have a lot of quads that are built now, and it's because, from what I understand from talking to folks, is because the cost of it is prohibitive. If you build a big apartment complex and you have to do fire suppression, you can sort of dissipate those costs across the unit. But if you're trying to build 3 or 4 units and then you got to pay for the same expensive fire suppression, for example, then now all that cost is only dissipated 4 ways. So this could be huge. And then I am curious how the stormwater regulations treat multifamily a little bit differently, but if they're going to move 3 and 4 units into the single-family residential code, if there's going to be any changes to stormwater there. Because as the mayor brought up, we did have a cottage court project that got tripped up on some costly stormwater requirements. So I think this is one of those situations where we want to do what's right for equity purposes in the environment, and we also know we have a dire need for housing affordability and supply, and sometimes they run into each other.
Yeah, I also wanted to uplift, was it Natalie? Hi, Natalie. I really loved what you were saying about like really a lot of the stormwater data being based off of railroad data, and how we're looking at equitability, how we're distributing cost across people that are downstream versus people that are here. And what you mentioned about like green stormwater development, I think something that we should really be looking into as well. I don't know if there's ways to incentivize it. I don't think I've seen that happen a lot across the projects that we are approving in the city, specifically around like permeable sidewalks, permeable streetways, bioretention projects. I would love to know more about that. I don't know if that needs to happen at this committee or like the Growth and Natural Resource Committee, but just like how that can work in tandem to the creation of affordable housing, I think is something that you really brought up. That was really, I enjoyed listening to that.
I like a transition, and the Growth and Natural Resources Committee today is actually talking about GSI and how to encourage some more of those green developments. So that's actually was part of my spiel if I got up here to give it, but I'm happy to stay in the background too. But yes, we totally agree. And like in the past 2 years, we've added 2 specific staff people on stormwater staff to be GSI advocates and experts. And also we are formalizing our city GSI policy. So all city projects will be defaulting to using GSI unless some environmental site constraints like soils and things like that keep them from doing it. So we're trying to have the city lead by example by having our projects show how easy and cool they are, so we can kind of move forward with that.
I love that. Natalie, you want to come to that meeting?
4 o'clock.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments? All right, how do we want to proceed with this? Should we?
Just had one thing before
Okay,
you
go ahead.
move to the next item. So I did want to just pause. You heard Ms. Carmen surface the notion of some things, some forward-looking things, and I know that our stormwater staff, Mr. Brown and Mrs. Hoyt, both have just some information along those lines to share with you. Just kind of looking forward, so just want to make sure they have that opportunity.
And then to clarify, this is the only item we have on the agenda today? Okay.
I just have 2 slides of kind of updates to address some of the topics that Natalie raised. So we are aware of some of the challenges within the Stormwater Plan Review Group. I should introduce myself. I'm Sally Hoyt with Stormwater. I'm the Stormwater Plan Review Supervisor. So over the past year and a half, 2 years, we have gone from being half-staffed, so having 4 of 8 positions filled, to being fully staffed. We've implemented a new position, a senior specialist who's present on the 4th floor of OEP to answer questions, particularly from homeowners who are, trying to put a deck on their house or that sort of thing. We've implemented weekly staff training to try to get at some of the consistency issues. It's definitely a policy in our group that we will meet with applicants upon request. So between review cycles, we are happy to meet with folks either on Teams or in person if they request that. We've updated our website, and we are currently in the process of updating the design manual. That's actually out for informal public review right now, and will be coming to council later this fall. And then I just wanted to do a really brief look at some of our green stormwater infrastructure actions that relate to development. So 2 things that are in progress. One is updating the design manual, which is clarifying some of the policy around what is considered green stormwater infrastructure, what is allowed, that sort of thing, and providing some updated design details for, from a technical standpoint, how to do that. We have already started working with various city departments to show how you can incorporate GSI into city projects. And as Ben mentioned, we are hopefully very close to implementing a policy that would require all the departments to evaluate that. And some things on our horizon are to have some sort of workshop or design charrette related to affordable housing projects and how to incorporate GSI. And we're targeting early 2024 for that. And then one of the things that Natalie brought up, and it's actually something she's given us as feedback maybe a year ago when we spoke to members of the design community about how we could better incorporate GSI and incentivize it. And the issue of privately funded GSI in the right-of-way came up. So that's on our, that's on my plate of something to pursue and look at, administratively from the standpoint of, encroachments into the right-of-way and maintenance costs and all those sort of things, how that could be handled. We've been targeting after the design manual to work on that issue. Ben or Wayne, you want to add anything? Thank you.
Any follow-up questions?
No, I just want to say that's really awesome. That's pretty much it. I'm really excited to hear more about affordable housing and GSI, given that, Raleigh has a very long-standing history with flooding, specifically in our southeast Raleigh area, as well as in my district a little bit, but it's not so much around the intersections of affordable housing. But I'm just really looking forward to that conversation. I'm glad the city is being thoughtful about the ways that we're looking at this.
Thank you. Anything else?
One of the things that really stuck with me is something that Natalie said, and that is when thinking creatively when the code says no. Like coming up with solutions and options, alternatives, I think is crucial. And, that's something I just want to be top of mind for everyone.
Anything else? Okay, so I guess we need to decide what we're going to do with this item. Mr. Raleigh, is there any additional work that you anticipate the committee needing to weigh in on?
At this time, I don't.
So I think it'd be appropriate to entertain a motion to refer it out with no recommendation.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
No one opposed? Okay, that's all we have on the agenda today. We'll have 2 items for our meeting next month, which will be the HBCU Economic Development Roundtable and then the generator music item that Councilmember Black brought to our attention. So we're looking forward to that, and we are adjourned for today. Thank you.